Hello Moto family, this is Moto Mike again, and today we're going to go a little bit more in depth on some parts of your motor for your motorcycle. And again, it all depends on, I'm working on carbureted, not fuel injected, and my motor is 2-valve, not 4-valve, so it's China bike as they say, and it's not a branded bike, but the concepts are relatively all the same. The major difference is 4-valve versus 2-valve, okay? And I want to also apologize since there's background sound. It's New Year's, so they're having celebrations and stuff like that. So anyway, I want to touch a little bit more on the sprockets because for most people, sprocket changes are the cheapest method of upgrade. And so roughly anybody can do sprocket change. But here's some misconceptions on sprockets. Okay, for instance, I brought today the front sprockets along with I have the rear sprockets, okay? So these are the front sprockets that connect to the crankshaft, and is the hidden part. You have to, take stuff apart to get to it and change. It's the cheaper one. It's because it's the smaller one. Okay, as you can see, I have two front sprockets here. Okay, and I'm going to line these up and see if I can get you to see. You can see the one in the back is larger than the one in front. Okay? You see that? You can see the teeth are sticking down farther. So, in theory, you would say that one sprocket has less teeth than the other. But be careful, because printed on both of these is 15 teeth. They're both 15s. But you can clearly see one is much smaller than the other one. See that? Even though they both say 15, they're not the same size. So when you're buying sprockets, make sure that the sizes are the same and that what you want and line up, because sometimes the teeth, because different brands are different actual sizes. So again, be careful, because there's going to be a different outcome, even though the teeth is fine. So people are asking, what teeth in the front, what teeth in the rear for the ultimate performance. But again, look, both 15s, but not same size. Okay, so do a little bit of research, find out exactly what your bike calls for, because there's different brands and they fit different ways. So both of these fit on my bike, but one was clearly smaller than the other, so the outcome is going to be different even though they're both 15 front teeth. Okay? So that combines with another aspect here. We have your motorcycle chain. Okay? When you want to change your sprockets, okay, and you have your chain on your sprocket like this, and then connected to your front one like this, okay, what happens is this chain is very heavy, okay, and of course it's made out of metal. So over time, what you're going to have here, I can see it better on this front one. If you look at this sprocket, you can see the silver markings. See that? Where it's not black anymore. That's the wear and tear on the sprocket. It's like a fingerprint, okay? So every sprocket set and chain makes its own married imprint on the sprockets. It wears a certain way, like a fingerprint. So if you change your sprockets out and then put a new chain, or put a new chain on old sprockets, sometimes what can happen is the wear and tear, you can see on here, the wear and tear on the teeth is different. So just like me, so I'm telling you from experience, that's how this chain came about, is it'll break the chain. I also had the sprocket connector on the rear sprocket completely snap also. So the rule of thumb is, and I know it's expensive and you have to do what you have to do, but in ideal conditions, if you change your sprockets, you need to change your chain. Okay, that's just a word of advice out there. If you're gonna change the sprockets, change your chain. Okay. So now I also have, if you remember, I have all these different pistons from before. Okay, I brought a new one in. See, now I have 5. So this is a new piston here. You can see how clean it is and shiny it is. There's never been any fire connecting to the top. Okay? But this is the one I just took out. Okay? You can see how burnt up the top is. Now, black on the top is normal because it's built up of carbon from the fire burning. Just like in a firewood stove, you're going to have the soot and the carbon left over. But I'll show you what you don't want. And the ideal what to see if the piston's no good is the sides. That's what you want to see. The sidewall here, you can see this one, it's completely shiny. There's no markings at all. It's nice and smooth. That's what you want. This is what you don't want. You see the black and the lines on the sidewall? That's an overheating. What happens there in the overheating process is that it gets so hot that this expands, and then it actually pushes against the cylinder wall, and it's scraping and clawing at the cylinder. Okay, and I know this for a fact too because you can feel it when it happens. When I was riding my Z200X by Motorstar, and I was in 5th gear and tacked out as fast as it would go, all of a sudden I felt the bike slow down and kind of give out. And that feeling was the piston actually sticking to the sidewalls of the cylinder. That was the loss of power. And as soon as that happened, I knew what happened already. And there was tons of white smoke coming out of the exhaust. Okay? If you have white smoke coming out of your exhaust, that's the #1 telltale sign that something's wrong. Because what's happening is the oil is passing by here and going onto the top and burning. That's what you don't want. The oil is supposed to be stopped by the piston rings right here and stay below. Okay? And not go on the top where the fire's at. So what's happened now is you've scarred it, and so now the oil has a path to come up and over and start burning with the fire that happens on the top here. And hence, that's the white smoke coming out of your exhaust. So if you have white smoke coming out of your exhaust, you need to be like me and have a pile of pistons now. Hopefully you don't. That's what the video is for. Hopefully I can help prevent you from having the expenses of all of this. Okay? Here is the block that came with it. Here's the other video. You can see this is the block I used for an example in the first video. That's my stock block before. Then I bought this block, which is a Honda XR200 block. And again, it's actually 196 cc's. Everybody knows in the biking world, 200 cc's doesn't mean exactly 200 cc's. Like I said, it's 196 displacement. but that gets in the whole mechanical engineering. No bike is exact except for I think Ducati and stuff like that, and Aprilia. When they have like they have a 998, they actually put the actual sticker of the real displacement. That's why they don't call it 1000 cc. But most bikes, if it's 198, they just call it 200. Okay, so just so you know, it's not literally 200. It's a little bit less, but roughly it's 200 cc. That's the categories they have. Okay, so this is the Honda XR 200 block. So you can see the difference between Motorstar Z200X block and Honda XR 200 block. Now they are compatible. They do work. There's nothing wrong with it. Funny enough, I thought that the branded Honda block here would be more expensive than the Z200 block, but it wasn't. The Honda XR was cheaper. That's why I bought it, because I knew it was compatible already. And so I purchased it. But again, like you saw the piston, that I burnt it out and I bored it out because I damaged it the first time. So I had to bore it out 0.5 millimeters and then hence buy a new piston that was 64 millimeter piston, because stock it's 63.5 millimeters. So I bored it to 64, and then everything was good until I went on a long ride and I pushed it too hard too soon. So don't do that. And so I burnt it up with that piston. Okay, that's the one that was in there. Okay, so this block's fine. It was cheaper, but you know, if you are a Z200 user like myself, now that I've done this, I recommend the stock block. It's actually much stronger, I found, than the Honda XR 200 block. So now the block that I have in there again is a stock 63.5 millimeter like this one, but of course this one's bored out big. So I did go ahead and spend the money on just getting the stock block. It was much stronger than, from what I have experienced, than the Honda XR. So your choice, what to do. Both's fine as long as you take your time, go through the break-in period. I know it's so much, you're so eager to be in a rush to get the performance out of your motor, but you have to just wait. Make sure you take the time to break it in. Give it some time to make sure that you don't end up destroying it again, because it gets really, really expensive. Now on that note, I'll give you some prices so you know what the costs are, because that's of course the number one thing for everybody is how much does it cost. Okay, this stock block by Motorstar Z200X cost me 2,500 pesos. Okay, so that's roughly $50. Okay, so just block long, so only just the block. The pistons vary on price range, and everything varies depending on who you buy from. So these prices are just general prices. Some people might be more, some people might be less. But just to give you a ballpark and how much I paid, so you know what the cost of stuff is. Okay, a piston can run you anywhere from 400 pesos to 900 pesos. Again, depending on the piston, depending on the seller, on how much the piston is. So a piston is a piston. I can't say that there's one necessarily stronger than the other. As long as you take care of it, the piston is just a basic metal piece. As long as it's set up for this and everything fits and you take good care of it, it'll be fine. Okay, so now we have, on my other video, we have the camshaft here. Okay, this is the stock camshaft. Now my 7.7 millimeter stage 1 racing camshaft cost me 3,000 pesos. Okay, again, give or take, but to give you a general idea of how much it's going to cost for these upgrades, your camshaft's going to run you about 3,000 pesos or $60. Okay, so 3,000 pesos or $60. Okay. Your basic air filter here, depending on the size and the brand, you know, KN air filters are the best because you can wash them, clean them, reuse them and stuff, but they're quite a bit more expensive. This air filter that I got, it cost me 450 pesos. So 450 pesos is what? 450 pesos is $9. Okay, so in American currency and dollars, $9 or 450 pesos. Okay, for your basic air filter. Okay, now I'm on here to obviously tell you the truth and give you my best opinion and advice from experiencing this and doing this myself. So I will tell you, I have this air filter here because I'm not running an air filter. Now, I can't recommend that because mechanically wise, you need an air filter to protect your engine. But I found that with a lot of these air filters I was using, I was still restricting too much airflow, and it just didn't work for the rest of my upgrades. It still wanted more air, and of course the more air you can get in along with more gas, the more horsepower. So I'm running it open with no air filter. Now that's dangerous because you can suck in debris and everything else and then get inside your engine. So do that at your own cost, knowing that if you suck stuff inside, you know, your carburetor is going to fast get dirty, and then hopefully it doesn't exceed and go through the carburetor into your head and stuff like that, because it can cause more damage. So run that at your own cost and know that, you know, it's more dangerous to go without the air filter. But again, it's your motor, it's your choice. So again, 450 pesos for the air filter. Okay. Now, the sprockets. Again, that's the cheapest and the easiest one to do. So most people starting out, this is what you're going to do, because the rear sprocket, again, depending on the size, I think this 45, I bought it for 400 pesos, so $8. And this smaller sprocket, I bought it for, I believe, 250 pesos, so $5. And then your small sprockets, depending on, really, the teeth doesn't really depend so much. I think on the smaller sprockets, they tend to be the same price irregardless, because it's only one tooth, because in the front, you only going to change one tooth. Not like the rear, you can change like 3 teeth, 4 teeth, but your front sprocket, you're only going to change one tooth up or down, okay? You're not going to change a lot like you can on the back, because one tooth in the front that gets changed changes a lot, okay? So know this, one tooth change on your front sprocket gets you a whole lot more, clear off my screen, sorry about that, than your rear sprocket does, okay? And these are 20 pesos, so like 70 cents in American money, okay? Now, we have the carburetors. My last video I showed, I had this 42 millimeter carburetor, okay? And then now I brought out the 32, okay? And you can see on the air intake, the bigger 42 versus the 32, and where it hooks into your head, you can see the two actually interlock, because this one's quite a bit smaller than this one. And typically on, you know, like my bike that's a 200 cc's, a 42 just will not work, okay? Don't do it. I spent 2,000 pesos on this 42 millimeter carburetor, that is way too big and the bike wouldn't run good. Okay, so know how big you want to go. So I recommend that on your carburetor, my stock carburetor is a 28 millimeter carburetor. Okay, this is a 32, and a lot of guys have gone to a 30 and only went up 2. I went to 32 and it ran great and it was really strong, and I thought that my carburetor was having problems, so I put the 30 millimeter on it now, but it actually wasn't the carburetor. So and I just haven't gone back to the 32. I just have it just in case I want to go back to it. But again, the 42 was 2,000 pesos. The 32 millimeter carburetor, I spent I believe 1,300 pesos, and then the 30 millimeter was around 1,000 pesos. Okay, so now if you're keeping note, you can kind of keep up the list of what your expenses are going to be. Okay, and again, a new chain costs you 500 pesos. Now your ignition coil that is going to create all of your strong power to burn all the fuel and stuff, that's 1,400 pesos for the 7,400 ignition coil. A spark plug radium is going to be around 700 pesos. You know, start thinking about adding all that stuff up and what you can afford to start with, and you know what you want to save up to do next. Okay. So I also have racing clutch lining in my bike and clutch springs, and that ran me another 1,500 pesos. So you know, as you can see, they add up. Just like the fuel filter was 850 pesos for the all metal racing fuel filter. Plus, you know, remember, unless you're a mechanic yourself and can do all this, then you have to think about the labor costs at the mechanic shop added on to these prices to know how much you're actually going to spend. Okay? Now, we have the 32 millimeter carburetor here. In my last video, I talked about the jets. And you have the needle jet inside here, and then you have your 2 jets on the bottom. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to open up the fuel reservoir here. I have just the 2 screws here. I have 1 screw here, and I have 1 screw here. So it's 2 screws with a cross tip Phillips to remove. And sometimes the screws are kind of stuck on there. So be careful trying to get them out, because there's a seal on your reservoir. So the screws need to be kind of tight, so that way the gas doesn't leak out of the seam in between here. Okay. Sometimes it's a little tricky to get it off of here, because like I said, there's that gasket on here. That's why you see in here there's a black, you can see the black gasket right here, so it doesn't leak. You do not want to destroy that, or your fuel is going to be leaking out of your carburetor. Okay, so do not damage this thin gasket inside. Okay, so that's your fuel reservoir that's on the bottom of your carburetor. Okay, this white piece here, this is your float. Okay, what happens here with this plastic float, and be careful, don't get a hole in this either, because it's just what it says, it's a float. So when there's no fuel inside your carburetor, then the float is down. Okay, and what that's going to do is it's going to allow the gasoline to fill up your reservoir. Okay, so gas is going to fill this up. As this reservoir fills up, it pushes your float up. Okay, because it floats on top and it pushes it up. Once it's to the top, it shuts off your fuel going into your reservoir. this is what controls so it doesn't overflow. Because if this gets stuck, that's when you have the overflow problem, and you'll have gasoline that's just constantly coming out, pouring out, pouring out, pouring out nonstop. Okay? Very small item, but so important. Okay? So that's your float. As you can see, it floats up and down to turn on the gas, shut off the gas. Turn on the gas, shut off the gas. Okay? Now, underneath here, you have these two screws here. You see one here and the other one right beside it here. These are your two jets inside the bottom of your carburetor. My last video, we talked about the needle jet here, and this is the part that's inside. Okay, you can see it inside. The silver here, that's the needle jet that's inside. Now we're talking about the two jets on the bottom, because remember, the three jets controls your idle, your mid-range on your throttle, and then your high throttle, full open. Okay, so idle to half open to full max open has three different settings. Three different jets controls that. Okay, so these two on the bottom here are what controls your mid-range and your idle. It's your main jet and your piston jet. Okay, so you see those two in here, you take them out and they look like these. Okay, your pilot jet is your small one here. This is your pilot jet and this is your main jet. Okay, so these tiny screws here, and be careful because they're brass, that can be easily destroyed. Okay, so take your time on trying to remove them because you don't want to damage them. And there's little holes inside that goes all the way through, and this allows a certain amount of fuel at that throttle. Okay, so you can give it more or less by the size of the jet, and the size of the jet depends on the size of the hole in the center. Okay, so you know, if idle, if it's bogging out, you know, then you need to change it to where it's either more or less gas. You can kind of feel it and hear it. If it doesn't sound like it's getting any gas, then you need to take your pilot jet and go one bigger. Put that in, test it, run it, see how it reacts. Then turn your throttle to the mid-range. Is it popping and cutting out? So, you know, change the next jet, and so on. Now, this part here, this is your choke. Okay? So this is what chokes it on a cold start. If you're having a hard time starting, you just pull up the choke and then start the bike, let it try to get warm, and then push it back down. Now, on my bike, I had the switch on the handlebars for the choke on stock. But once I started upgrading, now the big carbs don't have the cable hookup. So again, you're going to sacrifice being able to pull your choke on the handlebars if you upgrade. You're going to have to be able to stick your hand inside if you need to and pull up the choke manually. Okay? So, you know, these are just some of the things, and, you know, some of the prices on all the upgrades and stuff, and, you know, what you're going to expect. So, all in all, total for my bike now, it's around 50,000 pesos that I've spent, or $1,000. But just because I've had to go through, you know, so many different blocks and so many trial and error and, you know, mistakes, and trying to, you know, figure all this out and get it better and better. So again, that's the purpose of this video, is so hopefully you don't have to spend that much money in order to get it upgraded and running good. So, again, thanks so much for watching. Maraming salamat po in Tagalog, and thank you very much. And muy gracias in Espanol for Spanish. So, again, click on the subscribe button, hit the like buttons, send me any comments and questions that you might have, and I'll talk to you later.